Welcome to the Smooth Brain Society podcast. Have you ever come across something and thought, I'm not smart enough for this? We think the fault lies with those who present information in ways which are hard to understand. In an attempt to change this, we'll be speaking to researchers, experts, and all-round wrinkly-brained individuals, improving our understanding of a broad range of topics which are rooted in psychology. Join us as we try to develop ourselves one brain fold at a time.
Please note that the Smooth Brain Society podcast is distinct from the Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. The views expressed on this show are those of our guests, presenters, and affiliates alone, and we assume no liability for the application of the information discussed. We also take no responsibility for any change in brain folds on part of the audience. Viewer discretion is advised. Now on to the podcast. Welcome back to the Smooth Brain Society. I am again Sahir. I have not changed. With me is Olivia, back from COVID.
Yes, so sorry if my voice is a bit grizzly, but I'll do my best.
And for the past 2 episodes, I have started off by saying a sort of quote from a different language. Considering we're talking about relationships today, do you have a guess what language I'm going to be quoting in?
No, I don't know. No.
Oh, well, considering we're talking about romantic relationships, I went with Romanian. Considering romance language,
naturally.
Roma is right in the name. Why would you think it would be anything else? So the quote I've picked is Undes doi putera crește, which means when there are two, we are stronger, or anything on those lines.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about friendship, but kind of works here as well.
Yeah.
All right. Our guest today is Dr. Matt Hammond. He is a social psych researcher at Victoria University of Wellington. His research focuses on factors that influence the functioning of romantic relationships. He did his PhD at the University of Auckland before a brief stint at the University of Illinois in the United States. Matt's research tests how sexist stereotypes are not simply a factor linked to societal differences between men and women, such as representations in the government, but also functions to maintain gender inequality by influencing people's behaviors and satisfaction in their romantic relationships. Welcome to the Smooth Brain Society, Dr. Matt Hammond.
Good morning. So nice to be here. Man, that sounds fancy when you read it out like that.
I've got a question to start off with before we even get into anything.
Cool.
I was fortunate to be part of one of your lectures way back in 2018. And then you were saying how keen you were for the Kids See Ghosts album to come out. So did it live up to the hype?
Yeah, always loved Kid Cudi. Yes. So I play a lot of music before my classes, and sometimes people think there is a hidden message. And mostly it's because I wanted to listen to music before my classes, and it gets me excited. But I really like the idea that people think there are hidden messages in music, and that speaks to something very deep within psychology, that we like to see patterns and we like to try and understand phenomenon, even when there are no phenomenon there. And as I suspect we're going to talk about relationships, a lot of relationships is trying to understand hidden meanings in something that absolutely has no meaning whatsoever.
Right. Usually with our guests, we like to do a bit of a background. So how you got into the research area that you're in now and why?
Oh, can I give you a bridge story? I'd much prefer talking about other people than about myself. You covered my academic life. So I grew up in Auckland, and in high school in Auckland, I went to a gigantic high school, which gave me the opportunity to do psychology in high school, which at the time was extremely rare, but just with the amount of people that went to my high school and the amount of teachers, there were teachers who got to do whatever they want, and we got to take a lot of various things. So I've studied psychology for more of my life than I haven't studied psychology. I also feel unqualified a lot of the time to talk about real people and what people do, because I've read it in books for so long that I don't know if I have a really good perspective anymore. So in high school, reading psychology, I loved it. Reading classic stuff from Freud and going, no way, this is someone's actual life. They did this. They shaped all of humanity by talking about dreams and what your mother was like when you were 3 years old. That's amazing. As part of that, I read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, which is kind of a classic in clinical psych, as a book of case studies with absolutely amazing stories. Like, imagine one day you wake up in your bed and there is a human leg right next to you. That's terrifying, right? And so what are you going to do? You're going to pick up that leg and you're going to throw it out of the bed because you want it out of your bed. And it turns out it's your leg. It was your leg the whole time. You perceived your own leg as completely detached from yourself, as someone else's leg, and you trying to throw it away. And so with stories like that, I was like, the human mind is incredible, and I want to be part of the team of people who are doing these things. And then at some point, reality sets in, and you don't get to be the person who's coming up with amazing clinical diagnoses and talking about dreams. You learn the methods, and you realize that science has moved on a long way. Across university and then postdoc, really got into research and psychology and never lost the desire, the dream to find puzzles. And so my main research interest is all about the things that I find the most puzzling. Like, people say relationships are hard. I think you've asked people to email you a bunch of questions. Without knowing all the questions, I guarantee someone said, why are relationships so difficult? And I can guarantee no one said, Matt, please explain why relationships are so easy. How easy it is to get in a relationship and maintain a relationship. I want to know the psychological underpinnings of why this is such a fun, easy time for everyone. Humans have been getting into relationships for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And in 2022, we're still sitting here being like, man, they're hard. That's an amazing puzzle. So all of my research is interested in the kinds of ways we think about relationships and the things we bring into our relationships, like beliefs about gender. How come that what you believe about gender influences the way you behave towards a human being who's right in front of you? Like, why does that matter? But it does. So yeah, the overall message is I like to understand puzzles and why things are really not as what they seem to be.
Great. As you mentioned, we kind of we didn't get people emailing us in. What we did was we put a poll out on our Instagram and asked people what they would like to hear from you. And we're going to use those questions today to frame the entire discussion. We thought it would be way more interesting to see and also get some audience participation. And so
sounds fun and terrifying.
Should we first start off with what you would even define in your research as relationships, and we can go from there so we have like a basis?
Nice. I'll give you the textbook answer. A close relationship is what is done in my research. A close relationship is defined as enduring connection between people. So something that is going to last a long time ends up being a close relationship. And would typically require some sort of intense feeling or the subjective experience of that being an important relationship to define it as a close relationship. There's a lot of looseness in the definition. One kind of overarching principle of a relationship that differs from a parasocial relationship, a relationship has to be between. So two people have to be invested in one another to some extent. Doesn't have to be the same extent, but your relationship with a movie star or a singer like Kid Cudi is not a relationship according to the psychological definition, because Kid Cudi does not know who we are, which is a sad day.
So that's a parasocial relationship?
Yeah, para coming from outside, so outside of social relationships. It's a more recent direction in some psychological research due to things like Instagram, due to the ways that we're starting to feel connected with people. So one of the ways we feel connected with other people is by them disclosing personal information to us. So if you think about what happens when you're forming a close relationship with someone, you often like meet for coffee or over food, and you'll like slowly tell them about yourself, like the gentle stuff that like you don't want to scare them away. You don't go heavy straight away, but you kind of see how they respond to the easy stuff about where you're from, what they're like, just kind of check off red flags of like, are they going to be racist or sexist, or are they going to have like the complete opposite political opinion to me? And then if I'm comfortable there, I'm going to tell you about this embarrassing thing that happened to me 2 years ago. And then maybe an embarrassing moment that happened to me and scarred my entire childhood when I was 4 years old. So you kind of increase your self-disclosure to someone. And if they're continually accepting you, or at least they're not rejecting you, then you go, okay, I'm feeling closer with them. So as we are entering an age where we're now connected to people online, and they are showing us the inside of their homes and they're telling us their feelings, we might feel a close relationship because we're like, oh, this person's disclosing all this stuff to me and I'm feeling close with them, but it's not happening the other way around. They don't know who you are. They don't see inside of your home. They don't want to know what you're thinking and feeling. So a recent research trend is looking at parasocial relationships, the bonds that people are feeling with celebrities or online personalities, especially in times where there is limited social connection elsewhere, like pandemic times where you're trapped inside your house.
So do you think there's something inherently different about modern relationships? So there's the parasocial relationships, but is there anything else that's different?
One of the biggest arguments that's happening right now is how much relationships have changed. It is kind of a classic argument across all of psychology, is how much has the internet age fundamentally changed the way we're thinking and feeling about everything. I see a kind of two camps, and I think it's an age-divided camp. There's the people who grew up before the internet, and they're just saying, okay, the internet has changed the world, but all of our psychology is the same. It's like our psychology is just reacting to the newest form of technology. So all of the things we can study psychologically will now just occur in the internet age instead. It will occur online rather than in person. But for the most part, all of our understanding of the principles of what makes people people are going to be the same. And then there's the other camp of slightly younger people who grew up with the internet, who can't imagine how everything isn't different, and they say, shut up, old people. Everything is fundamentally different now. So I'm unfortunately in that old camp. I'm in the old camp of people. So in relationships, for example, I think that the invention of online dating, I have to qualify this, online dating like in the 90s and early 2000s of like putting up a profile online or a forum post, that then turned into app-based dating like Tinder and matchmaking algorithm sites. I think that all of the patterns we saw in dating behaviors before then are now just the same things that are happening online. So instead of walking into a bar and behaving a particular way to women, someone will jump online and behave a particular way to women. And in both situations, that will be influenced by their history, their beliefs about gender, the extent to which they've been brought up with traditional gender role expectations. And so when we examine problems like dating violence 20 years ago, dating violence now is still dating violence, but it occurs across these new domains that didn't exist 20 years ago. So that's kind of my camp, but feel free to disagree. What do you think? Do you think that the world has fundamentally changed? That?
Oh, I don't think so. I think it's a good way to think about it. Or it's like an easier way to think about it. Like with the internet now, I feel like there's just so much to think about, and it's easier just to think in the old way, I guess. Simpler.
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought. It's a very dangerous thing, is that we will take the path of least resistance. If it's easier, we will believe it, even if that's not the best thing to believe.
I think it maybe exacerbates things a little bit. Just the internet means like you have like more access to everything or whatever. So any behavior you would see like less of or hear less of, you just see and hear more of it.
But also with Tinder, you've got so many more options that you didn't before.
Yeah. So the question then is, does that change the way we date? Or is that exactly the same way we used to date, except it's just kind of a different frame? So genuinely, researchers 30 years ago, when they were thinking about dating, they imagined people as walking around public and like mini dating people, everyone who they saw. When you don't get to message someone online to find a date, you have to walk around in the world and imagine dating the people that you see in the world. So you're seeing a lot of people. It's like if you imagine your way walking around university or walking around town, the idea was that your brain is kind of scanning, can I date that person? Can I date that person? Without you even realizing it, which is a very fun thing to think about, that everyone's kind of doing that at some low-level process. From that perspective, then, that say, actually, you're exposed to similar amounts of people. It's just a slightly different medium. One of the differences, for example, is very private if you can do it in your own home versus because you can spy on people as much as you want without them spying on you too.
Well, one of those questions which we got was exactly that. How has online dating kind of changed relationships? Do you have anything more to add to that?
One of the big changes we've noticed is that example I gave of walking into a bar, and I think there's a classic idea of like hooking up with someone who you find at a bar, which used to occur. And I say used to because The most common way that people meet a romantic partner was and still is meeting someone via a friend. So you're friends of a friend, you meet them first in some sort of friendly context, and then you develop a relationship from there. That has always been the most common way to find someone. There is such an idea that you have to either do something extreme like start a new hobby or start a thing and meet the people who you find the same activity. Most people just kind of fall into relationships because we hang out a lot. I guess, are we in a relationship? That's the most common. So 20 years ago-ish, the study is done in the early 90s, so I'm actually going to say 30 years ago and feel slightly old. 30 years ago, the second most common way was to meet someone at a bar. So you go out to a club, go out to a bar, hook up with someone, and a relationship would progress from there. We're currently seeing, even before COVID, that drop off a lot and be replaced by internet dating. And so it is becoming an increasing means of finding someone, but still not as common as meeting via friends. And even accounting for the fact that if you meet someone on Tinder, there's a chance that a friend of a friend knows them and can be like, oh, absolutely not that person. Or like, oh, yeah, no, they're very nice. So even when it's online, there is still a bit of friendship network influence there.
So is what you're saying, people can kind of chill out in a way, like relationships might just naturally occur. People don't need to be doing all these crazy things to find a partner.
Yeah, I mean, that's the overwhelming research from relationship science ends with a very sad message that we don't know how relationships form. We know like when they happen, and we can ask people, oh, that's interesting that it happened. But we cannot predict if two given people will form a good relationship with one another. There is no measurement we have, no magical test we can do to be like, oh, these people are compatible and these people are not compatible. So as far as we know, people just get together.
That brings us really well onto one other question we got. I'm keeping all the names out of this, keeping it real anonymous. How does this work with dating shows and TV shows like that, like Married at First Sight and all these relationship science which says we can find like the perfect match for you and so on?
Yeah. So my question to you then is, what is the goal of these shows? I don't watch them because it is like taking something I love and then doing something very horrible to it.
Something evil.
I imagine the same thing. So some of my colleagues here, they study addictive behaviors, and I always go, oh, it must be pretty interesting for them if they walk into a casino and see psychology being used for the purposes of making money and taking money from people. I'm like, this thing you love, psychology, and the thing you spend so much time loving and researching, and then you're like, and these people over here are just turning it into a money farm. And reality dating TV shows are very similar, where there are a lot of psychological principles that they're using, but I don't think, and this is my personal biased opinion, that their goal is to actually get people to fall in love. I think they have different goals. But as someone who might be watching those shows, you tell me what their goal is.
Definitely the entertainment side of things. Like I think we were talking to Mark Wilson last time, and they're like extroverted people and open people, like the people that will just make the best TV.
Right. So if your goal then is excitement, what is the most exciting relationship? Because it's probably not a loving, caring relationship where two people are mutually responsive to one another consistently, that they kind of settle down, have some tea, have some food, look at a sunset, enjoy a plane. They don't want that, right? That maybe works for 5 minutes at the very end of the entire show where you can have a satisfying resolution. But you've seen romantic movies. Romantic movies never are 90 minutes of someone who's already in a relationship having a nice time. The second people are in a relationship in a romantic movie, you roll the credits, right?
Yeah.
You're like, we're out. We don't want to deal with the rest. It's either going to get really sad or really boring. So we're done. Like, we wanted the drama, we wanted the excitement, the tension. The second that's resolved, we've got to see the director's name and find out who the actors were the entire time. So I think that's what reality TV shows are designed to do. They're not designed to form real life lasting relationships.
Do you think then people have this model of relationships that it's supposed to be exciting or have drama, and that being boring is like a bad sign?
Yeah, I do think that. I think a lot of the narratives around relationships are that they should be consistently a source of meaning and challenging and exciting. And part of that, I think, is based on truth. We do need to grow as people. So across your life, it would be very boring if you were the same the entire time. If you are in a relationship with someone, the exact same thing applies. If that relationship was the exact same thing for the rest of your life, we would find that unsatisfying. Humans tend to crave novelty and the pursuit of goals. So on average, we're looking to expand ourselves in some ways, especially if we're happy. If we're having a good time, then we're like, oh, I want to go to university. I want to learn a thing. I want to learn a language. I want to do a different career or start a hobby. And our relationships should be that same thing. But my perspective is that should happen over the course of a lifetime. It shouldn't be every single day we need to do a new thing. There is something very comforting about familiarity and stability, knowing that you can always return home to a relationship partner and they will consistently be caring and ask about your day. That's a really good thing. You shouldn't consider that boring. I think that's fantastic for our well-being.
That kind of helps us segue really nicely into two questions that were asked. Why do people gravitate towards toxic relationships, and why do people try to self-sabotage their relationships?
These are really interesting thoughts that come up when people talk about relationships, right? The idea that of their own agency in relationships. People have different conceptualizations of how much the control they have in their relationships. So, for example, you might find yourself in a toxic relationship. And if you do, there is a whole bunch of helplines out there. Shine.co.nz has got a really good website. Google something like Netflix help website. The help website for Netflix has got like a bunch of videos from Netflix shows and they give you extra helplines. That's actually a really nice health resource as well. So with that out the way, one of the interesting conceptualizations here is that people think that they are to blame in some way, right? I am the kind of person who gravitates towards these kinds of relationships, or in my relationship, it's gone bad because I have self-sabotaged that relationship. In my research, I'm really interested in where these come from, because some people think they're entirely to blame, and at the other end, some people think that when a relationship goes wrong, it is absolutely the other person's fault and they didn't do anything wrong. They were perfect the entire time. And you can probably hear that I'm smiling as I say that, because both of these ends are irrational. There's no evidence for anyone having the ability to completely control what happens in relationships, and equally, you have some responsibility in all relationships that you have. Where we have to navigate the here is why people feel that way. What's going on in their lives? And the answer is going to be a really boring answer for you, which is the same answer as how do you start a fire? When there's a fire that's happened and something's gone wrong, you go, well, you need this combination of different things. But that combination of things could be anything, right? It could be a match. It could be electrical spark. It could be lightning from the sky. It could be a wildfire that started somewhere else. And you think, oh, well, how did this fire start? Is such a difficult question when there are so many different pathways that could get us to the point of a relationship breaking down to the point at which those people need to break up. So I'm going to dodge that question. How's that for a dodge?
On the same lines, there was another question, which was, why do people stay in abusive relationships?
Yeah. One of the really interesting areas of relationship psychology is that in the world of what we consider abuse, we would consider someone yelling at someone else abuse. And I think that's a very fair definition. However, most people we know have yelled at their partner or a close friend. So the vast majority of us have been in a relationship in which abuse has occurred to some degree. So technically, all of us stay in abusive relationships. Imagine if your mum, for example, yelled at you one day. Never had yelled at you before, never had been abusive, but one day yelled at you. You would probably keep that close relationship with your mum, right? It's pretty harsh to say, like, well, you yelled at me once. Forget your entire history together. So everyone has some degree of forgiving behaviors and moving forward in a relationship. I mean, if you've had a fight with your partner, the healthy thing to do is say sorry, resolve your disagreement in a healthy way, and try and move on together. And relationship psychologists would say you're doing a very healthy, productive thing. And at some point, that's completely unhealthy. At some point of forgiving someone and trying to move on when they are aggressive or violent or abusive is the worst thing to do yourself. And from the perspective of relationship science, I really like this as humanizing the people who are in abusive relationships, because there is a narrative in which people say they don't have any agency. They don't have the power to leave. They've been tricked. They've been gaslighted. They've been so abused they don't even know it's abuse anymore. And those kinds of narratives, I think, remove any power for that person to leave that relationship, which I think is the appropriate outcome for them. So that means in relationship science, we can say, oh, actually, that is an extreme end of a process that happens with everyone. We all have some degree of tolerance, and it's really hard for us to decide what level of violence, what level of abuse is acceptable, and to try and save the relationship and what is not. That is why I think that the best way forward for people is to talk with other people around their experiences in relationships. Seeking counseling, talking to the free helplines, getting other people's perspectives means that you can make a judgment for yourself without having to just switch modes and say, oh, I have to believe what this person says.
That's great advice. Another question we've got is, how do you deal with dating someone with an avoidant attachment styles? And if you could just go into attachment style theory.
Oh, wow, we're jumping into attachments. Right. So attachment theory, one of my favorite theories, a huge theory, an oddity, I think, in psychological research, in that attachment theory was developed in the 60s. So it is an old theory. And in science, an old theory normally means, like Freud, that most people have said absolutely none of this works anymore. We've moved on. With attachment theory, that didn't happen. Attachment theory is one of those theories that has been picked up and has grown, and people have said, not only was that a really good description of behavior back then, it is way more applicable now than we actually thought it was to begin with. So way back when, John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth were two researchers who were independently working towards the same idea about how children were learning how relationships work, how our parents respond to us. And they figured out that we actually have an inbuilt tracker in our heads. So as we're born, there is a thing in our heads that kicks off that says, how are people responding to you when you do things? What is the social world like for you? If you cry, do people come and give you a hug? If you cry, do people ignore you? What is the kind of the social context for you? That is in our heads from day one. So we have an inbuilt mechanism that is kind of collecting all of the information about the social world for us. And that produces reliable patterns of how people relate to other people. So these are called attachment styles. The classic ones would kind of organize themselves along 2 dimensions. So we're going to get fancy in our statistical jargon here. So a continuum of the extent to which people prefer to avoid relationships when they're stressed. So people high in avoidance, when they're stressed out, when they're scared, when they're sick, when they're frightened, they don't want connections with other people. They want to deal with it themselves.
So when they're not stressed, they're better at it?
So one of the things with attachment theory is that attachment systems only activate when we are stressed or scared or frightened or upset. So if you're fine, then you're fine. You will actually look secure regardless of your attachment style. A lot of people will see this with avoidance. You'll be flirty with someone who's avoidant, and they'll be flirty back, and you're like, oh, I'm with a flirty person. And then you'll start a relationship with them, and then they'll be stressed, and then they'll disappear, and you'll go, what? This person can't be avoidant. They were all flirty and lovey, and they were expressing all these fun, connecting thoughts that an avoidant person wouldn't do, but they've just ghosted me. And it turns out, no. When they were flirting with you, they weren't stressed out. They were having a good day. Their attachment system wasn't activated. When they disappeared is when something stressful happened. It just so happens that something that is stressful for someone who's high in avoidance is the perception that someone is relying on you too much, and the perception that you're too invested in a relationship. So a relationship itself can be a stressful inciter of avoidance. So that's one of those continuums. Continuums is definitely not the plural word for continuum. It's got to be continua or continui or something like that, right?
So it's not that people are in this category or not. It's
Yeah, early on it was that. So the way that Bowlby and Ainsworth classified children was saying, you are avoidant, full stop, and you are anxious, full stop, and you are secure, full stop. But now we love dimensions. We love degrees of variability. And one of the things that it allows us to do as researchers is say, most people are low. Like, you'll hear this, and especially if you're higher in avoidance, you'll be like, I'm an avoidant, put that label on me. That's me proudly wearing the avoidant badge. But actually, in terms of degrees, if you think you're very avoidant, you're probably moderate on the scale. You're probably like the people who are extremely high in avoidance. You know who you are, but most people tend to overestimate the extent to which they have an insecure pattern of connecting with others. Most people are much more secure than they think they are, which is kind of fun. So yeah, one dimension is avoidance. The other dimension is anxiety. When you are high in anxiety, if you're stressed or sick, the way that you deal with that stress is by connecting with other people, trying to build closeness by making sure you're investing more in relationships, which is risky, right? Because relationships are tough. So if you're high in anxiety, while you're also investing in relationships, you've got to test the strength of that relationship. So you've got to make sure that everything is 100% secure. And so you've got to prod it and find a stick and say, how likely are you going to be to break up with me? But seriously, would you ever break up with me? But seriously, if I ask you tomorrow, you might change your mind. So how much can you guarantee 100% for sure that you're never going to break up with me? And that kind of pattern, while it's seeking security, comes across as conflict. The other person's going like, hang on, I told you one time, and now it seems like you don't believe what I say. You're not being responsive. You're not listening to what I'm saying. If you're going to be the kind of person who doesn't believe what I say and is going to test this relationship, I probably want to break up with you. And then the person high in anxiety notices that. They're like, oh, there was a flash there. I saw it. I saw the moment in your eyes where you're like, oh, I want to break up with you. And so that proves why I should have tested you in the first place. So anxiety captures that of like the need for closeness, but also the uncertainty around the stability of closeness. Going back to one of the earlier questions, actually, this is why some people might feel like they self-sabotage relationships, is because people have an orientation towards relationships that they tend to bring to their relationships. So if you're high in avoidance in one romantic relationship, you are going to be high in avoidance in your next romantic relationship. It is a fairly stable trait that people bring across relationships. It can change, and it does change slowly across time, but for the most part, it is quite stable. So you have to work on it.
Do you have tips for people who are high in an avoidant attachment style or high in an anxious attachment style, what they can do on an individual level?
Be kind to yourself. Take some Jacinta Ardern kind of pandemic advice. And I think psychologists do get caught up in a deficit model where we're like, oh, this is an interesting pattern of behavior, and quick to jump on, okay, those people who are higher in avoidance and higher in anxiety do tend to break up relationships more. And it's not necessarily the worst thing. As a relationship psychologist, across most of the research I've done, there have been plenty of people who have thought, it's very good that relationship broke up. And as you will see in your own lives with your friends, you'll be like, I'm really glad that I have many friends where I'm like, I'm immensely glad that those people broke up. And it's just a massive relief for everyone involved. So breakups aren't bad. Sometimes you genuinely need to break up a relationship. So sometimes we can get caught up in things like, oh, just because there's a higher breakup rate, that's a worse attachment orientation. One of the founding principles of attachment theory that is still continued today is that it is based on an idea that we've got an evolved system that is learning about the social environment. If you're in a social environment which people are unfriendly and you have to rely on yourself, it makes a lot of sense that you've built up a system where when you're stressed out, it's time to shut down and withdraw from other people and rely on yourself. So acknowledging that often these are quite adaptive can be one way to think of like, okay, your current attachment orientation is a product of your entire history, and it's not a bad thing or a wrong thing that you've got here. And if you want to change it, cool. You, on average, will experience more close relationships, and you'll feel better about your relationships. I'm not telling anyone that they have to change the way they are. especially now. Like maybe you just need a bath and a hot chocolate right now. It might not be the time for you to be like, okay, who am I going to be? How am I going to change my entire orientation towards relationships? However, if you're in that camp where you're saying, I do want to change, just like learning a new language, a goal for myself is being relatively more secure in relationships, remember it's not all on you. You've got to have someone who you're in a relationship with who can give you responsive care. For the most part, countering attachment tendencies involves thinking about the kinds of patterns you're getting into, like the high anxiety. If you're unsure about someone's love for you, testing it. That's a destructive pattern, because continually testing someone's love for you is inevitably going to end in them saying, I'm getting very annoyed at you testing this love for me. With avoidance, a reluctance to open up to other people and say, I do fine by myself, and every time I try and get into a relationship, at some point they're not there for me when I need them. It's way easier for me. I should have just looked after myself the entire time. Countering those tendencies in the best way that you can, slowly across time, can be really effective. So for people higher in avoidance, working on disclosing your thoughts, your feelings, and your goals to other people, to the extent to which you're comfortable with that. So being vulnerable around other people is really tough for people high in avoidance. Conversely, people high in attachment anxiety find it quite easy to be vulnerable around other people, but they find it relatively more difficult to let other people be vulnerable towards them, because that other person is their source of support. They're like, you are the person who calms me down. Like, if you're stressed out, then what am I going to do? Like, I'm going to be stressed out that you're stressed out, and you can't even calm me down because you're stressed out. So for people higher in attachment anxiety, working on responsive ways to listen to other people and figure out what they need and believe what they say. And working towards those goals, we know in research means that people tend to be more secure across time. Or there is a cheat code. Get into a relationship with someone who's very secure. They will give you pretty responsive care, and you will become more secure across time. Unfortunately, you will make them less secure across time, because relationships work both ways, because they're not getting responsive care from you.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you are a relationship counselor or a clinical counselor, you can deal with these things and work with these things. But I think for most people here, you're not a relationship counselor. You're a human being who's trying to actually have a real relationship with someone, not fix them. I will say this, though. So there is some research, and you can look up a bunch more. But in relationship psychology, we would call this buffering. Buffering is the word for when you know someone has a particular response to getting stressed out. What are the things that you can put in place to buffer the extent to which their system gets activated? So for people high in attachment avoidance, they are particularly sensitive to themselves being vulnerable and to other people feeling like a burden on them, which I think in general is quite fair. No one loves to feel vulnerable all the time. If I said to either of you, by the way, here's a baby, it's now your baby, you have to look after it, that would be extremely stressful, right? That's a burden that you didn't want to take on. So both of these motives, you don't need to be vulnerable all the time. Avoiding burdens when they're not nice burdens to take on socially, positives. So what ways can we approach relationship goals in ways that don't force people to be vulnerable or acknowledge that they're uncomfortable about being vulnerable and don't make things a social burden? So, for example, if you're in a relationship with someone high in avoidance and you want to have a difficult conversation about some sort of conflict that's happening, so in your relationship, you want to go out more and see friends, and they don't want to go out more. They want to avoid people. How can you resolve this? One way would be to say, okay, text them. We need to have a talk, full stop. What a terrible way to initiate a conflict.
In the full stop.
Yeah.
Very sort of.
If you're giving someone the entire space to imagine all of the vulnerability.
Yeah, but this is where you should reply back, yes, we do. Full stop.
Yes, we do.
And both people are like equally as stressed.
Oh, yeah. You are setting the stage then, right, for reciprocity of negativity or reciprocity of ambiguity. And so both people are going to then enter this conflict scenario fully wound up, fully charged, fully stressed about what is going to happen in this conversation. So contrast that with talking to someone of, hey, I love you so much. And I want you to know that everything we're about to talk about is in the context of me wanting us to have a really cool relationship. Here's how I feel. I feel like I want to hang out with my friends more. What kinds of things do you want to do? You're like, okay, this is a very interesting way of approaching it, right? So you're completely toning down this, like, this person might break up with me. Then, okay, we've started off by saying love. And then they've asked me for my autonomous opinion about what's going on. They haven't said, I need to do something. They haven't said, here is a problem for you. So if I said, we need to hang out with my friends more, here is the problem that you need to now put in your lap, and you have to deal with this burden that you weren't prepared for. You had a long day at work. You weren't asking to come home and have a problem. But a genuine question is an opportunity for them to self-disclose their goals, their feelings. And from there, you can work towards a goal that is mutually good, mutually bad for both of you. Compromise, in other words. And if in a relationship you can never compromise with anyone, then refer back to the thing where I'm like, maybe not all relationships need to continue. If you can never find a compromise, then maybe something else needs to happen.
That goes well into another question, which was what behaviors and traits are to look out for, like red flags. And my initial response to that was look out for like China, maybe Turkey, those kind of flags. But I think they mean more relationships.
Think so. Could be wrong. I know.
Tell me about your red flags. I love this. This is an ideology question. This is what are the norms that we've agreed on as a society are to be considered red flags? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What are your red flags, Olivia?
Oh, maybe just like having bad attitudes about other people, or being kind of like up themselves, or yeah.
I've heard this one. Being rude to waiters, and I think that maybe like captures something about that of like, oh, this is a red flag of this person being like mean to humanity in general.
Yeah,
I've heard that red flag before. Yeah, what about you?
It was on the same lines, kind of like lack of empathy. That gets very annoying. Being very self-centered also.
Research would back those up, and that people who are less empathetic, who take other people's perspective less, tend to be more dissatisfying as relationship partners. Makes a lot of sense. So perhaps my answer to this question is we probably already know the red flags. And part of what I love about research is why we don't pay attention to those red flags. We know that they're there, but we either ignore them or we completely overlook them, maybe. Or we acknowledge that they're there, but then go, oh, but actually I'm getting something exciting out of this relationship. Like imagine you're flirting with a very famous celebrity. That celebrity, I'm guessing, is self-centered. They like the amount of attention they get. They are used to getting a lot of attention and people being focused on them. But they're a celebrity. That's very exciting to be flirting with a celebrity, right? So we might see these red flags and then say, but actually, I get to hang out on a private jet and go to fancy meals, and there are things that are offsetting these red flags for me. So that is part of the process of relationship science that I think is really interesting. But going back to an earlier point, we don't know of anything, really. We do know, for example, very basic patterns of what makes people less compatible with one another. Like if you have completely different religions that don't allow you to date people from the other religion, the relationship is more likely to end in breakup. If you've got completely different political attitudes, if someone's like super left-wing, someone's super right-wing, they're very likely to break up. So I'm not going to be able to blow anyone's mind with the information we have currently about these kinds of red flags, because they are so obvious that it feels like we didn't even need to research that in the first place. What we did need to find out is how interesting it is that we can't find these things that match people together or make them bad matches for one another necessarily.
Yeah, we've got a question from a listener. How couples who are complete opposites can make it work? Do opposites attract?
And birds of a feather flock together. So I don't know where we're left now. People who are more similar to one another are attracted to one another. People who are more different to one another are attracted to one another. People get together from completely different sides of the planet. People get together with a person they met in primary school and have been together with their entire lives. And so they came from the same time period, the same town, the same schools, the same teachers. So the answer to this is Some people are similar on some things. Some people are opposite on other things. Everyone is just kind of doing their own person thing. And we find areas of connection. We find areas of difference. But for the most part, I think everyone has some similar level of things they can share with some people and things that are different to other people. So the question then is, how do they make it work? They do. Or they don't. As far as we know, it doesn't matter how similar you were to begin with. Your chance of breaking up is the same.
Oh, I thought it was if you're similar, like on the big 5 personality traits, then it's more likely to work.
The most recent meta-analysis of personality traits shows that there's nothing that's predictive of relationship satisfaction or commitment from your personality traits, especially including combinations across people. This is a study that was conducted in 2020 from teams everywhere across the world. We kind of put together all of the data they had on couples. It's a fantastic study led by Samantha Joel, if you want to look it up. And so the author list has got like 80 authors on it. It's one of those amazing studies, which is just a page of author names up front. Everyone put all the information together to ask questions like this. Of like, okay, with all of the data we currently have on relationships, predicting satisfaction and commitment, like the big things in relationships, personality traits can take or leave, doesn't matter.
Where do star signs come into this then?
Were they in that study?
The honest answer that I have to give then is we don't know, because they weren't in that study.
What was important in that study? Did they find anything?
Oh, you tell me. What is the thing that is going to make them most likely to stay in a relationship with someone else?
Satisfaction.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yep, that's in the top 3.
If they want to be in that relationship and they want to make it work?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Trust in someone. The amount that you are motivated to remain in that relationship. The kinds of signs of affection and care you give someone when you're motivated to remain in a relationship. The classics. The things that we didn't need relationship science to show us. So we already knew that those were going to be the big ones. We knew that before science. If you ask, so there's a fantastic book, I can give you the link if you want it. It's a book that did a qualitative study of people who are in their 70s and 80s. They've been in relationships for about 40 to 60 years, depending on their age. And they've done more relationship psychology than anyone else on the planet because they've been in a relationship for so long. They've been in relationships before relationship psychology even started as a field. They say the most important things are trust in someone, caring for them, good sex. So if all of the things we already know about, I'm like, yeah, that's what you need for a relationship, a romantic relationship to continue, I should specify, are those ones. And the obvious ones that will be on any list anywhere. Again, the interesting thing is everyone knows that. Yet we know the answers. The answers are right there. How come we're failing the multiple choice test if we already know the answers? Why is it so hard to express care to someone who we've been in a relationship for 30 years with? Well, it's because they're really annoying.
We can flip that around and ask, like, what are the 3 worst things, the 3 most likely reasons for people breaking up?
Oh, yeah. Would you just flip around the words then? Lack of wanting to continue that relationship is the biggest one. If you don't want to, then there's nothing in the world that can make that relationship a good relationship. Relationship counselors will tell you that very quickly. If there are 2 people there who want you to fix their relationship and you don't want to fix it yourself, that relationship counselor's job is to find a way to dissolve that relationship in the most healthy way possible. So yeah, a lack of trust, a lack of expressing love are going to be the main ones that mean that people break up that relationship.
Why won't they text me back?
Oh, can I steal the fire analogy I use later? Why is there a particular behavior that happens? But I'll tell you this. Research on ghosting is now really interesting research that has happened since the invention of technology. I'm sure it happened in a different form before technology. It didn't really have a word as far as I know, but someone can email me and tell me if there is a word for the olden days form of ghosting where you disappear on someone. We know that ghosting is actually the most destructive way to break up a relationship. So people who are ghosted feel the largest drops in their well-being and the highest increases in their stress compared to if someone says, I don't want to see you anymore, or if someone gives, I'm going to be really busy over the next few months and I'm really sorry, but work's really hard for me at the moment. So if they give you like that kind of excuse, even that is better than someone disappearing forever. So we do know that this person's emotional state of wondering why someone is not texting you back is a really tough mental state to be in. That's empirically found to be really difficult. So what would you say? What do you think is a healthy way to communicate to someone, hey, I don't want to see you anymore?
Maybe a positive, like, I really enjoyed spending time with you, or I enjoyed meeting you, but I don't think this can go any further. But as you said, saying something rather than just ghosting them would be better than, yeah. Do you have anything to hear?
I have nothing more to add to that. That's probably like the best. Just like being honest per se.
Sounds good to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, that sounds about right.
I have one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering a word that you spoke about before, gaslighting, if you could explain that.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out the context of what I said. All right. So I use the word gaslighting. Gaslighting refers to psychological phenomenon of convincing someone that their subjective experience of reality is not true and replacing it with your version of reality. So someone says, I'm feeling really sad, and you say, no, you're not. You're feeling really angry right now, is a very easy example, I think. And actually, you'll probably see this in parenting. So gaslighting is kind of a very emotive word, right? Because in parenting, you wouldn't say parents are gaslighting their children. If a child's really sad and they're like, I'm really angry, and you're like, no, you're sad. But it is what's happening. It is that same psychological process of explaining to someone else what their subjective experience is. And it feels bad. When it happens to you, it feels invalidating. It feels like someone is not being responsive. It is a negative behavior. So within the relationship science field, we would class that as either coercive or manipulative behavior, where you're telling someone how they're thinking and feeling. So it's unpleasant and it's a destructive behavior. So we would say it is unhealthy and should be replaced with healthy alternatives. In that case, I would guess, and this is entirely speculation, I've got no evidence for this, I would guess it is happening when there is a mismatch. Someone is feeling something, they are seeing and hearing something else from someone, and instead of recognizing there's a mismatch, they want to insert their version of reality onto them and make them agree. It's a very tense behavior to think about as a lecturer, because I'm sure a lot of lecturers do that. Someone has a very valid experience and we interpret it in a particular way and we say, no. Here is the truth. And so uncomfortable topic to think about it from that perspective. So yeah, should be replaced with healthy alternatives.
So people can do it unconsciously, like it's not always someone being manipulative.
Very rarely in relationship science is someone behaving destructively for the purposes of behaving destructively. So I think and you'll have interviews with forensic psychology people later on who will be able to tell you much more about this, is that in relationships, especially if in relationships where you've been together for years, both people are probably feeling vulnerable and they're feeling hurt. And when they're retaliating, when they're being aggressive, it's not because they want the other person to be hurt. They'll say that they love that person, but also they'll behave in ways that do not look like that. So often these are really unhealthy ways to meet some sort of need that they have. If you believe Tony Ward's model around the reasons that people are aggressive, it tends to be that exact same line of thinking of when people are being antisocial aggressive, it's not because they are intentionally trying to be antisocial aggressive. They're intentionally trying to meet some sort of need that they have, and they're doing so in an unhealthy, destructive way for other people. There are very few people in society who will actively try and hurt other people, and that is not my domain. Those people tend to not actually be in healthy relationships at all. They don't tend to sign up to relationship psychology studies, or they don't answer our surveys. They don't want to. Why would they help us, right? So in forensic psychology is when you need to delve into them.
There were quite a few questions like this. I would say like the one which I found the funniest, because it was like, will I be alone forever? Asking for a friend. And you can't say, will I be alone? And say asking for a friend in the same sentence. You've kind of given yourself up there. That kind of needs to go more with the stats itself, isn't it? Like, what is the likelihood of people getting in a relationship?
Most people who want to get in a relationship, and not everyone wants to and has to, gets into a relationship at some point in their life. So it happens for most people. Also, and on the downside, the vast majority of relationships end in dissolution at some point. Within the first year of dating someone, 3/4 of those relationships will break up. Even after 10 years of being with someone, you kind of get down to percentages of like 5 to 6% of those relationships will break up in that year, and the 11th year about the same. So every single year that you're together with someone, there's a small chance that you will break up with them. So remember that relationships involve growth and doing fun things together and communicating trust, communicating your goals to someone else. So I don't think people will be alone forever, but you don't have to be in a romantic relationship. Your family members, your friends provide all of the needs for you to have fulfilled, happy, meaningful life. There is nothing special about a romantic relationship. As far as we know, that means it's a necessity to live a life.
My perception is that a lot of people feel like there's something intrinsic about themselves that means they can't be in a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that, especially after breaking up with someone. Like, you're very introspective of all of the ways that particular qualities of yourself or particular behavioral patterns have led to a breakup. Very common, and why in relationship research, the models that describe the process of relationship breakup are identical to the models that describe the grief of losing someone, either from them leaving or from them dying. It's like a dissolution of a relationship is psychologically the same. So there is a lot of introspection, a lot of ruminative thinking, a lot of what if I had done this and what if they had done that? Am I going to be like this forever? And for the people like that, if that's how you're feeling, talk to someone. There are a lot of people, friends, family, counselors. Find someone who can understand that feeling in you. And that is the first step in working out what it is, what it feels like, and what you want to do with it.
Because we haven't spoken about cultural context yet, is there any research talking about different cultural backgrounds and marital expectations and how relationships work?
Yes, this is a fantastic question and a huge area. So one question is unfortunately going to not do it justice. I will shout out a book by Karandashev, which is called Love Across Cultures, which is an entire book about the different ways that love is expressed through language and the different kind of interesting meanings across different languages. So, for example, in English, the word love, it's super complicated, right? Because we love pizza, we love dogs, we love our friends, and we love a romantic partner, we love our parents, and all of those loves are fundamentally different loves to one another, but they're exact same words. So in some languages, there are different words to describe different feelings of passionate love versus familial love versus platonic love. In English, we just kind of throw love around, and then sometimes we'll say, "Oh, but I'm in love with this person," and then we go, "Oh, that's the special guy."
Oh, that's perfect, because someone asked a question, what is the difference of being in love versus loving someone?
If you believe this book, the difference is the ways that your culture understands and describes love. So the difference between those two things is the difference that you put into it, the difference that the ways you use it. And if you have a friend who's been in love with every single celebrity who has ever existed, then you look at their in love and you say, I don't think your in love is the same as my in love when I talk about being in love with a partner. So it is language, so it is highly subjective and highly culturally bound. The ways that we use language are consistently going to change across time. So thinking about different times as different forms of culture, different groups, different countries. So one aspect of that is huge, and the patterns of the ways we express relationships, the formal structures that are in place for relationships. For example, the extent to which marriage is an institution. Do you have a arranged marriage culture? So India and China, for example, the vast majority of those relationships tend to be arranged marriages, where the person who's getting married is part of this really interesting network with their family and their friends to like scout out potential partners, and that person's network of family and friends, they're kind of negotiating with that. And the marriage itself is not so much about those two people, but it is about those two networks going, oh yeah, we're going to be this is going to be a compatible network of people together. We can see success that way. In Western cultures, the primary structure tends to be what is called, if you take the arranged marriage term for what's different to an arranged marriage, it's called a love marriage, where two people are like, ooh, this marriage is about us. We're like, who cares what other people think? So the structure of those relationships produces different expectations, different setups, different traditions. However, if you just look at the amount to which people dissolve relationships, no difference. If you're allowed to divorce, and in some cultures you're not allowed to divorce, so you got to take them out. But when you are allowed to break up a relationship, the rates of dissolution are pretty similar across arranged marriages and love marriages. The rates of satisfaction and commitment and feeling in love are also pretty similar. So on one side, we're like, that's really interesting. And on another side, we're like, maybe none of it matters. Maybe relationship psychology, we don't know anything. Like, we do all of these things. But ultimately, if you take the perspective that what matters is breakup or not, then do what you want.
Why are we drawn to someone when we're not looking for love?
This is maybe another gigantic thing, which is an entire lecture on love. I'll say this. What is amazing to me about love is exactly that. We don't exactly know what happens when you fall in love, but when you fall in love, the biological process that is happening is like an explosion of hormones in your brain. So something triggers it. You see someone across a crowded room and you lock eyes with them. You're Romeo and they're Juliet, and your brain goes boomf, and it is full of testosterone, estrogen. It is full of vasopressin and oxytocin. It's full of all of these different neurochemicals that change the ways that you are feeling excited and lustful and you want to be close with someone. At the same time, your brain is full of neurotransmitters like dopamine. Your adrenal system kicks off, so your heartbeat will genuinely go fast. It's not a fake feeling when you fall in love. Your heartbeat is genuinely going faster. Your skin is genuinely getting redder and more flushed because all of your blood vessels are dilating and you're like extremely excited. The combination of this thing means that when you fall in love, you are obsessed with someone. You go to bed and you are awake, full of adrenaline. You're not sleeping. Your entire hunger system is like dampened down, and you're like, all I can think about is this person, and I want to be close with them. So the vasopressin, oxytocin hormones are like bonding, in-group, out-group type hormones. Do
you know what time frame this is?
We don't know is the true answer, but if you believe people's reports, it can happen instantly and it can happen over time. So you could start a relationship with someone and after 7 months of dating be like, boom, we're in love. But if you believe what people say, then it can happen instantly. So it's different for everyone. So the only thing we know is that being in love will ruin your day. That whatever you were planning to do that day, forget about it. The rest of your day and the week and maybe your lifetime is now changed because whatever your goals were are now different. Your motivation, what you want is completely different now.
That's a good place to end.
Yeah. The one last thing which we do is with all our guests, we go through a few rapid fire questions. So if you're ready.
Summer or winter?
Winter. Give me a hoodie any day.
Movies or TV series?
TV series.
If your life were a movie or TV series, what genre would it belong to?
The kind of sci-fi version that's slightly in the future and you're not quite sure if it's a comedy or if it's a horrific commentary on all of humanity, like Black Mirror.
Morning, noon or night?
Oh, nighttime. Sadly, I'm awake at night.
Outdoors or indoors?
Indoors.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Which weighs heavier, a ton of feathers or a ton of steel?
And then now this is a YouTube clip of Lemmy saying steel. Steel is heavier. What a good YouTube clip. Thank you for making my day.
What's your weapon of choice?
Love and kindness, right? That's thematic.
Which superpower would you like to have?
Teleportation. Please let me avoid traffic. I will use teleportation to be able to go to my job and live my normal life, except I'll never have to experience traffic ever again.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yes, why not?
What is your least favourite type of music?
Oh, too hard. No music.
So silence.
Yeah.
What is your favourite food or cuisine?
Oh, cruel. That is a cruel and unusual question. Give me fried green beans in oil with a lot of garlic, regardless of where it comes from. I will eat that 24/7.
Nice. What is the ugliest fruit or vegetable?
Love and kindness, they're all equally lovely in their own way.
Good answer.
If you could be any animal, what would it be?
A dog, as I've been told by other people. not by self-selection. Apparently I'm a dog.
What is the worst thing you've ever paid money for?
Oh, speaking of food, sad, any food that is a sad food. So probably a pizza where the entire topping kind of came off in the pan as they handed me now just kind of slightly cold bread. So that was one of the worst moments of my life, probably.
What ridiculous thing has someone tricked you into believing or doing?
Oh, all kinds of things. And the terrifying thing is that when you're a researcher and you read all these articles, and then 20 years from now, half of them won't be true anymore. So half the things I've ever read in my entire life, probably. Half the things, including half the things I've said on this podcast and I've disseminated to an audience, is going to be a lie. So please don't believe anything I say.
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Wellington, New Zealand.
What quote or saying do people say which you think is complete bullshit?
Oh, I just tried to look at the list of questions you had because there was a bunch of things I responded to, and I was like, if you told me relationships are and then completed that sentence, I wouldn't believe you.
That's good. I like that one. What is your version of there are two types of people in this world?
Those who can count, those who can't count, and those who don't care.
Pretty similar to Mark Wilson's one, actually.
That's very frustrating that psychologists think similarly. We instantly hear that and we're like, how can I be funny? How can I amuse this audience right now? I reject your premise and try to insert a silly answer. You're going to get very good insight into the ways that psychology researchers think.
What reality TV show would you like to be seen made?
Oh, I don't want to be mean, but none of them.
They all suck, do they?
I think they've all served their purpose and we can move on as a society.
On the same lines, why didn't you sell your soul like other relationship researchers to like work with, such companies or like dating shows and things like that?
Oh, I think part of that answer is the same as walking into a casino. It is using psychology to make money, and that makes me sad. I want to use psychology to make people inspired and happy, solve puzzles. So all of that, I'm my own boss, and that's extremely satisfying. So you really couldn't pay me enough money to do it, to manipulate people to stay on an app and watch ads for the rest of their life.
What's legal but still feels illegal?
Most of psychological research.
How so?
Hey, come sit in this room. By the way, we're going to lock you in and you have to look at this computer screen and figure out how to mentally rotate James for half an hour.
If you were not doing this, what would you be doing?
Writing for fun, probably. I did English Lit in university as part of my degree. I really liked English Lit. I would find it a much more stressful job because it is a lot harder to get paid. But yeah, writing for fun as opposed to writing for academic purposes, which is sometimes fun, but mostly feels like work.
What type of person is most likely to win a drinking contest, and why is it a relationship researcher?
Oh, is it? Brain. I'll give you my brain and you can evaluate my brain, but my brain went like this. Well, you'll see alcohol tolerance, right, is built up over time. So the person who is most likely to win a drinking contest has had the most practice drinking alcohol and is the most capable. And so that's where my brain went, which is deeply boring. And I think the perfect way to end this podcast.
Now, the perfect way to end this podcast would be our last question. So if you could give us one piece of advice to leave with, what would it be?
Okay, big pause that you can edit out while I actually try and think of something good.
We can insert like elevator music.
Yeah.
You could say multiple things if you've got multiple.
I don't. I'm extremely blank. See how hard it is when it's like a personal thing? I don't want to talk about myself. You can just watch me struggle for now.
Are you stressed? Avoidant attachment style.
It's unethical to diagnose someone from afar, but... Okay. Here is my advice. I have no genuine advice except to say Gang of Youth's recent album, Angel in Real Time, is phenomenally good. It's also kind of emotional, so check out Il St. Clair because that is music that will make you extremely happy. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Matt. And where can listeners contact you if they'd like to reach out to you?
You can contact me at matt.hammond@vu.ac.nz.
Beautiful.
Thanks so much, Matt, and thanks everyone for listening. Again, you guys can find us on Instagram at the Smooth Brain Society, and we're also on Facebook. And yeah, until then, check out whatever music makes you happy. Thank you.